Welcome to Practical Shamanism. I'm Katie Weatherup. I'm a former engineer with 20 years of experience working as a shamanic practitioner, and I hope to help you to connect to your personal power and magic, and to support you in living a really good life that just keeps getting better. Thank you so much for joining me. I was doing a journey today for my Money Manifestation Intensive program, and one of the many energetic interventions was to clear vows of poverty from past lives. So I would offer that my client base tends to have a disproportional number of people who spent their past lives being Buddhist monks compared to entrepreneurs. And back in the day, most humans, most of the time, really had to make a choice between a secular or a spiritual life. And granted, in days of yore, there was more spiritual experience for secular people, so they would come together and do rituals, and that was much more woven in. And certainly there's still people in modern religions who have high holidays that have particular rituals. But looking at indigenous cultures, you would have the equinoxes, the solstices, different times when you would celebrate and get into right alignment with different kinds of energy. And everything is beautiful about that. But overall, there was an organization of society for the most part that tended to have there be a few spiritual experts that focused on that and then provided a gateway and a support and a structure for the rest of the community. And one of the things that's cool about the modern era is how much we have the opportunity to have a direct relationship to the divine. And part of that is just the fact that we have more elegant ways to store food and distribute goods and go about our daily lives that set up there being leisure time available. Also the internet and the access to books and courses and all of those kind of things. It's a really golden time to be able to live both a spiritual and a secular life. But one of the upshots of a lot of the people I work with having had so many lifetimes where they took vows of poverty or vows of celibacy and renounced those parts of their life, in this lifetime, when they're dynamically experiencing those things, they can end up feeling like a teenager in love with the kind of emotions and attachment when they're a much older age, because they haven't had the soul experience of romance and all of the things that go along with that. And it can be kind of uphill for people who have a lot of gifts and abilities and clarity to find an aligned way to work out the whole livelihood thing. And some of it, I think, is just that the extensiveness of the soul mastery isn't there in the way that it might be in other areas. And specifically for this podcast, the thing I wanted to talk about was something the guides really shined light and illuminated for me, which was to say that when we made oaths and swearings and vows in other lifetimes, when we had more ritual and use of magic, the impact and the length of how long they last tends to be greater. So it's a lot easier to be impacted today by an oath or a swearing or a commitment we made a number of lifetimes ago. And this can be a hidden factor that messes with our results and our ability to have a really contemporary experience. So, former engineer geeky moment, one of the important concepts in thermodynamics, which was one of my better subjects when becoming a mechanical engineer. I just love the equations balancing and being able to track where energy went. Maybe a little bit of foreshadowing. I think it was the first A I got in an upper division engineering course at UCSD. But we have this concept of entropy that has to do with energy moving from an organized state to a less organized state over time. And humans are very organized. Biology and life is very organized. And then things move to less organization, and then they, reform in some other really organized manner. So if you threw a deck of cards on the floor, they'd kind of be spread out in entropy. But if you organized them and built them into a house of cards, you would have a very organized structure. But there was a lot of effort that went into getting the cards to be in a house of cards and sustaining it by not bumping it or having it hit with a wind or anything else. And when it comes to our best experience working with energy, I think it's really useful to understand how entropy functions in our journey and in our lives. Because when we have things that have a lot of energetic intensity around them, they just don't break down and dissipate as quickly. So we end up potentially with organized energy around events or experiences, or in this case, oaths or swearings, that hold their form much longer. And one of the things I'm constantly supporting my clients in is just sort of clearing away these old, outdated energy structures that are getting in the way of having the most freedom and movement and resourcefulness and aligned present experience. It's a little bit like on a warm summer day, you don't want to go out in a huge heavy down coat. I mean, maybe if you're a wrestler trying to drop some pounds for, getting into a lower weight class, you might. But for most of us, we only want as much outer gear as is appropriate and as is aligned for our experience. And if we have more layers between us and the world, it limits our experience. And so having an energy field that is strong and vibrant and filters energy really well, but isn't having all these layers of old energy between us and our direct, immediate experience of the world is really valuable. And this entropy thing can happen in past lives when we have intense events, and from this life where we have really major events happen. And when we move along the timeline away from the event, the energy begins to dissipate. And if it's something that we think about or go back to mentally, or have a bunch of other circumstances that are really similar. So sometimes I work with someone who has been cheated on a number of times, had a number of romantic relationships end in that way. There's going to be a different charge in relationship to infidelity than someone who had one relationship in that way, but no other experiences with it. So sometimes we end up by thinking about things re-energizing a situation, and sometimes it's just so big that it doesn't dissipate. So for example, if someone is molested, it's really good to have processes that dissipate that energy, because there's so much charge and intensity and potential trauma to it that even if you've blocked it out, even if you've forgotten the memories and you never think about it again, that buildup of energy can still remain. And so one of the protocols I really like using is my elegant trauma release, where I'm just going along these painful, difficult events and speeding up entropy to dissipate the energy so that you don't have this energetic relationship or overshadowing from something that's gone before. And I think it's one of the neatest tricks that we can do with energetic interventions in general, shamanism in particular, is to speed along entropy of dissipating organized energy around pain and trauma and misery and old patterns and all of these kind of things. So, of course, this is something I can do on someone's behalf, or if it's not in your budget or alignment to work with me one-on-one, the fire ceremony that you'll find under the resources tab on the articles page of my website is a fantastic laser-focused little ritual that you can do in a very specific way, especially if you do it repeatedly, to go in and dissipate or take apart that energy. There's also a transmutation breath. I believe I've talked about that in other podcasts, where you're inhaling into your heart chakra the organized energy and exhaling neutrality. So I'm not going to go through the whole description of that here, but there are also many, many other ways people who do somatic experiencing can have that result of releasing the stored trauma energy in the body, which also simultaneously dissipates the original energetic experience. So it's really cool and useful to have this sense of how to speed entropy along. So we have a very, very light, clear, available energy body for being in the current moment. And what's interesting about past life experiences is we don't have the memory, so we're not recapitulating in our mind or ruminating on the experience, but it's also hidden, so we don't always see that it's a filter through which we're experiencing the world or feeling unsafe or those kind of things. And so specifically going to vows and oaths and swearings, we just have a different relationship to that in the modern world. And there is a great variety, just such an enormous variety of how people treat giving their word or swearing an oath or making a vow. Any woman who's on online dating will have messages from men protesting, no, it's straight up, honestly, absolutely no BS. And clearly in the next few messages, there's evidence that that's completely what he's up to. He's absolutely swearing up and down he's not manipulating while vigorously trying to manipulate. And I'm sure that, men on online dating can have similar experience with women. So there are absolutely chronic remorseless liars who will swear up and down of, their integrity and truth, knowing that they're lying. More common is people lying to themselves. So they'll, swear up and down about what they're going to do or not going to do. And, it won't actually happen. One of the bigger vows we come up with in our modern society is a monogamy vow as part of marriage, and yet the ritual for that has all kinds of different variations, and it's personally meaningful, and at the same time it's not energetically binding necessarily. There, are a small percentage of people who build in some kind of a potent energetic ritual, but for most people, that vow is something that's personally symbolic rather than having a way of moving energy that works to enforce a vow over and over again. And we have the statistics on how much vows of monogamy are or are not kept. Some people take those, again, very seriously. Other people believe in the moment, heart and soul. They'll take themselves very seriously, and then they do not. That's not where they are. I had one very awkward experience of someone contacting me on a dating site, and we were also connected on Facebook. And on Facebook, I was seeing him moving toward his nuptials, and I really debated with myself whether, it was appropriate to attempt, because I couldn't necessarily contact his fiancée without her permission, to make sure that that was within their relationship agreements. And those questions are always really, really complicated. But the upshot is, while some people take their word very seriously, the human mind can rationalize anything. So a lot of times we rationalize why it's okay to break our word. And I'm a big fan of choosing again. I think it's better if we're not being unclear about it. I think that transparency and consent by other parties who are affected is an important part of that. So I'm not a huge vow of oaths and swearings anyway, but I think for modern people, there are only a small number of us who necessarily have a context. So certain religions have a pretty serious, I am committing my life to be in this organization in this particular way. So baptism ceremonies and things like that. And those have, some potency with them. But even our modern practitioners of the organized religions are taught a lot of skills, but not necessarily energetic mastery. And there are certainly some exceptions, but for a lot of them, they're not moving energy related to a vow or an oath or a swearing. Whereas what I've been shown in working with a lot of people with past life vows of poverty that they took as, Buddhist monks, is the intention of that is to, renounce your worldly goods, to live in a more communal way where the necessities of life are collaborated on and shared. Nothing wrong with that. It's just a different experience. But there's an energetic binding of the lower chakras that happens that tends to push energy up into the other chakras, which if you're a Buddhist monk meditating for many hours a day, wanting to have this profound out-of-body experience with the eternal. That's really useful. And especially for our ancestors, when the vibration was a lot lower, it took a lot more hours sitting on the cushion to have the kind of profound connected experiences that are just more available to modern people because our vibration is higher. You may or may not agree with this. My personal framework that I've developed over 24 years, and the whole being shown what was happening as we were leading up to 2012, and lots of different things. But for our purposes, whether you resonate with that or not is not particularly important. But what is really useful is recognizing that there was an energetic structure and binding and organization of energy that was meant to stay in place, that went with these kind of vows and oaths and swearings, especially taken in a religious context, that are not, for the most part, happening in the modern era. So even if you go through the steps of a ritual, the facilitator, the priest or the pastor or the person in that role isn't necessarily weaving and anchoring and solidifying energy in service to that intention in the way that happened in past lives. And when we're working with energy and magic, things tend to follow intention and focus, and having people who have become experts in implementing an energy structure when someone consents to take a vow of poverty or a vow of chastity means that they can be awfully darn good at setting the energy up around that outcome and that configuration. And the trouble and the challenge for this one in particular is it's just not a good configuration for a modern secular person who needs to be self-supporting. Even if you had the massive good fortune or complicated fortune to be a trust fund baby, your ability to keep and assimilate and make good use of those resources can be really compromised. So there are plenty of people who, had the proverbial silver spoon in their mouth who end up later in life having a lot of financial difficulties. And there are many reasons, but one of them is this, root chakra not being available to form this financial material foundation and relationship with the world that is really massively supportive. It wasn't what I was focused on today with the journey, but it can also come up with magically infused and anchored commitments to each other. So I think I talked about this in another podcast, but one of my sort of tongue-in-cheek public service announcements is, for those of you who think it's romantic to make a for this lifetime and all lifetimes marital vow, please stop doing that. It's causing havoc that we end up cleaning up later, because it's so much better to be with someone because they're an aligned contemporary choice. So if your forever soulmate across all the ages chooses not to incarnate that lifetime, or they're still exploring addiction, or they decided to be a Buddhist monk when you were on the other side of the world, or they came grumpily into an incarnation that they didn't really want to be in because of the binding, so much can go wrong and not leave you available to a really aligned contemporary experience of love and partnership and connection, and that can be really problematic. So it's fantastic to have some kind of a process or a thought about freeing ourselves from oaths and swearings in past lives. And I periodically do intensives where, I go in and I offer this work. So if you're not on my mailing list and you're like, yes, I would like to have Katie take a really focused look at that. If you're ready now, you can look at booking a session. And if you want to be in an intensive where you get a lot more personal work kind of in a group setting, that's also an option. You can do fire ceremony. If you kind of meditate and feel into places where you might be really bound by an oath and a swearing that was anchored by your strong emotional intention and magic. So when there's magic and structure and intention and focus and ritual, that creates energy that stays sustainably in a particular configuration for longer. And when there's really big emotion, that creates things that stay in a structure for longer. So these are things that are resistant to entropy. So our more recent past lives have more of an impact than our way long ago past lives. And it doesn't mean that there can't be something that gets repeated over and over again, in which case that can be a really strong theme, or something that was just massively a big deal that never got resolved from a much older past life. But in general, over the passage of time, we naturally become free of these things, but I would argue that that happens too slowly. So getting in there with fire ceremony to dismantle these structures, because just like intention and focus and the fuel of emotional energy came together to create an energy configuration that is still in your field, you can do the same thing with your intention and focus and ritual now. So fire ceremony, pretty simple, but very potent ritual to say, let's take down these structures. Let's free ourselves from all of these structures that were perfectly valid. If you broke an arm and they put it in a cast, the cast is super supportive. It's very constraining, but it's darn useful. But you would never want your arm in a cast once it's healed up. There are a lot of downsides to having your arm in a cast. I am, knock on wood, I've never had that experience, but from a sense of empathy and conversations with people who have, not a super fun thing to do. Fantastic to have the option if you need it, but we want to take away these corsets, these energetic structures that are binding us and constraining us and limiting our choices and limiting the contemporary flow of our magic. That was a piece of the journey I was doing today, where clearing vows of poverty was one part of it, to remove blocks to money flow. So what's in the way of the people who signed up for this intensive, ideally having money be something that really flows to them easily and becomes very abundant. And of course, manifestation is more complicated. We have right action and discernment and all kinds of other things, but having the energy structure really aligned to support the experiences that current us wants to have makes a really big difference. And so I would invite you to think about whatever is appropriate for you. Fire ceremony is one ritual. You may have other rituals, but this idea of going in and releasing yourself from old past life vows can be really, really supportive, and recognizing that they bind us in a way that we may not have a reference for in this lifetime, because our vows don't tend to come with magic and ritual. So if they did happen with magic and ritual in this lifetime, then, there's a little bit more cleanup. It's something I can help with. Lots of people can help with. It's not that it can't be undone. It's just, it takes more skill and focus and persistent work, or very focused work, to take these things apart. And similarly with old traumatic events, we just want to speed along the entropy of, abuse that was survived as a child, for example. And also, I'd like to really invite you to consider not being loyal to the truth and the commitments and the versions of past you. And that doesn't mean, willy-nilly we ignore the interconnectedness we have with other people and the impact that we have on them as we move, but being willing to come to contemporary agreements and understandings and updated ways of participating really lets a relationship live and breathe and stay in alignment and a win-win, and a much better chance of sustainability that isn't out of fear of leaving or stubbornness, or I'm loyal to the story that I told that this was going to be forever, but having things be really, really aligned. And so vows and oaths and swearings are stories about what future you will do. And there's a potent possibility to just pay attention to what current you is doing, to pay attention to what you would wish for future you. It's good to be kind to future us and not leave them with a more complicated situation. There are days I don't really feel like exercising, but I know if I get at least 10 minutes in, that my biochemistry will be more supportive for future me over the next 24 hours, possibly longer. But if we trust future us to make really good, contemporary, up-to-date decisions for ourselves, rather than telling ourselves the story that we'll be loyal to something. And this is a lot of complicated work. I really like Byron Katie's work. I really like the clarity of finding elegant win-wins in the ways that I participate with other people in the world that are based on the present moment and what's unfolding, rather than trying to hold things in place. And there's another part of me that really likes to hold things in place, and I'm often trying to moderate that influence so that I can let an appropriate amount of change move through my life, because sometimes I have shored up situations that were considerably less than ideal, romantic relationships and living situations and occasionally friendships. And it didn't end particularly well. When that house of cards got knocked down, there was a lot of tears and hurt feelings and stress and unhappiness. And so there's an elegance to giving maximum freedom to current you and setting up future you with the same gift. And the less that you're loyal to, and the more there's this deep trust in just moving from a clear, cohesive place. So it's not like I have to be loyal to not cheating people. It just wouldn't feel good to cheat people. And I can't imagine future me would feel that way. So it's not something that I have a lot of identity or oaths or swearings or promises. It's just not my jam, and it's never been my jam, and I don't think it's going to be my jam in the future. If that changes, I will attempt to understand what the heck is going on with that new territory. But I think it's really nice to be careful about what we commit to, and renegotiate promises we've made that are no longer in alignment, that are something that isn't the right thing for us. And sometimes people who care about us would be upset if we were, keeping our word out of loyalty rather than a contemporary desire to do so. Again, much bigger, much more complicated kind of conversation about all of this. But I just wanted to share this illumination of how old vows and oaths and swearings that were with passion as well as ritual and magic can echo across other lifetimes where they're not appropriate, and that setting us free from those is really, really helpful. And, do-it-yourself approaches, and it's also something that I'm very, very good at helping people with. So if you feel called to work with me, I would be honored to help free you up in the present moment. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. Also, a special thank you to my patrons for your support. You offer me the time freedom to work on passion projects like this one. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.